All right. Welcome, everyone. Hello. Hi, I'm Amber Rowden. I'm the community storyteller here at Rainforest Alberta. We have Brigitte Legault, who's our community manager in Calgary here at Rainforest Alberta. And welcome to Lunch Without Lunch, our weekly connection every Wednesday to meet new people, see what's happening in the Calgary and Alberta tech sector and innovation sector. So I want to start off, well, today we're going to release the Calgary, Alberta, Edmonton scorecard results. But first, I want to start off with, is it anyone's first time here? Awesome, welcome. Even to you, Peter, even though you've been here since 2015. Hi, welcome. It's great to have you here. So we're going to start off with a land acknowledgement, and this land acknowledgement is from the Calgary Foundation and the Calgary Film Festival, and it is a video, and we absolutely love this video.
My grandma always told me that the land took care of us, and it still is taking care of us, and it never asks for anything back.
It is a way of life to always honor the environment. It's not something that you just can turn on and off. It's a living daily lifestyle.
A land acknowledgement is a way to acknowledge that we're coexisting in this land with the native people, and we should acknowledge that this is actually their traditional territory. But at the same time, we are all guests to this land.
The land plays a big factor in who we are. That's what makes us strong. That's what makes us strong people.
Awesome. So if you're also online and you're coming from anywhere else across Alberta or the world or Canada, please share a land acknowledgement in the chat as well. And hello to everyone that's online as well. So what is Rainforest Alberta? Well, we are a community of entrepreneurs, doers, dreamers working together to build an innovation sector in Calgary and to build new ideas and companies and collaborations. So we have a video, a media project to tell you what Rainforest Alberta is all about.
At Rainforest Alberta, we believe a culture of trust is the fertile soil where ideas grow. Our budding innovation ecosystem is a network of relationships pulling each other up as they push forward in their own field. How? Our social contract holds us accountable to demonstrate trust across the province. By raising the standard of trust, Alberta's ideas, talent, and resources can be evergreen. Visit rainforestad.ca to sign the social contract and start growing together.
As the video mentioned, we use a social contract, and these are 10 values that we live, work, and play by, and that resonate with us. We ask anyone that joins the Rainforest Alberta community to sign the social contract, to live by it, to use it to grow their companies, their relationships, personal or professional, and to use them when you're growing companies. And if you haven't already, please take out your phone, please scan that QR code, and please sign the social contract. It's very important to building a culture of trust, which we'll be talking about a lot today. And next slide, please. So we are at Lunch Without Lunch, and we have only 2 Lunch Without Lunches left. So we would like to invite all of you to come join these because they're going to be a lot of fun. We're having a lot of fun today, and it's all about making connections and finding out what's happening across Calgary, across Alberta. And so next week is a good example of that because we'll be featuring a lot of really cool companies, organizations, meetup groups that are doing really awesome things here in Calgary. So please join us. They're both online, and we'd love to have you. We'd love to have you invite a friend, or maybe 5 would also be great. Yeah, if you have any information or if you would like more information on that, it'll be on our social, newsletter, everything. You can also scan that QR code and register right now. That'd be great. Thanks. Okay. So today, we're talking about the 2023 scorecard report, scorecard assessment across Alberta, across Calgary, across Edmonton. But first, I want to make mention of our incredible team who has helped us with this. We have the wonderful Shannon Pestun here today. who's going to share about the diversity, equity, and inclusion and all the amazing work that she has done on this project. We also have Janelle Morgan, who has also done a lot of work on the project, and Rose from Cashew. They have all been instrumental in helping us with the scorecard. For the past 3 years, I believe. Shannon, this is her first time helping us with the scorecard, but it's been absolutely incredible. So I just want to thank them all for the hard work they're doing. And with that, we will get started. Yeah, we'll just get started with a little quote.
I'm not going to read these quotes to you as we go through some of the qualitative data that we received, but feel free to take this in. And there's a lot more data in the report, the written report that will be published on our website, if not today, by the end of the week. So we'll go to the next slide. So prior to getting into the results for 2023, we wanted to just take a quick look back at the results for 2022. So some of the key takeaways from 2022. So speaking to Calgary in particular today, just want to make mention of that before we get started. Our report will encapsulate Edmonton and overall Alberta lens. However, today's presentation will be focused on Calgary. So in 2022, I think it was our highest score at 689 out of 1,000. We had increased engagement from the ecosystem that year. So just over 240 or 50 surveys from Calgary alone, which was fantastic, and a lot of engagement from new folks last year, which was great. So some of the key takeaways were about embracing failure as a pathway to success, the need for policymakers to create long-term foundations for the ecosystem success, the power of representation, and engaging and empowering ecosystem from a grassroots level and through this intersectionality lens. And so we worked with the DE&I expert last year, Rachel Wade, who had provided these recommendations that you see above. And we just wanted to take this opportunity to share some of the initiatives that Rainforest undertook. I want to make mention that the scorecard survey is a measurement of the ecosystem at large, not just of the rainforest community. So we try to make that as explicit as possible in the survey itself, but there's still some confusion when we look at responses. And so the information and data that comes out of this survey is meant for all of you as individuals in the ecosystem to take this data, apply it to your other market research and strategic planning for the year. So at Rainforest in particular, last year, how we kind of picked up some of this work within particularly the culture and leadership pillars were through various programs. So one in particular was our Rainforest Circles program. We had 60 leaders participate in that pilot program last year, which was supported by the CIC. And by the way, a special mention to the CIC and ERIN for supporting us in this entire survey report. It was a 7-week course that developed leadership capabilities, and it was based on a commitment that related right back to the social contract. So we developed this kind of leadership mantra, and every week we explored new ways to lead. It had rave reviews. Early stage companies really articulated how it helped them improve in leading their own companies. Over 91% of Circles participants rated their experience a 4.5 out of 5 or higher, and 97% said they would do it again or recommend to others. And so we are running it again currently with our friends at Collectively Tangled. Sarah is here with a focus on the intersection of leadership and mental wellness, and again, 60 plus registrants in this cohort. So we're really proud of that. The other big piece that we undertook last year was using Lunch Without Lunch, or this weekly meetup, to really highlight underrepresented founders and really hearing transparent stories about how they've lived or their experiences have gone in the ecosystem. We also tried to bring awareness to some under the radar resources like the technology access centers that exist across the province and the country. We looked at Jedi Hub, who offer DEI policies for startups and other organizations. We had the National Queer Innovation Group and the Queer Meetup. We had countless kind of interesting and under the radar groups share at Lunch Without Lunch. So that was really fascinating. We also took the last quarter of 2023 to do a citywide outreach. And so we went to some of our existing partners like the Open Learning Lab, SATES business students at the post-secondary kind of avenues, as well as new community, community associations and nonprofits that serve new Canadians and other groups in the city who may not be aware of the opportunities available to them in innovation. So we hosted a sold out event here at Platform with Zach from City, our friends from SATE, Inclusity, and Missy Platform as well. And we introduced some of this early stage programming and career pivoting resources that exist for people wanting to come into tech. Again, incredible feedback from that event and some great relationships seeded with new audiences. So just to highlight some of the things we've done here at Rainforest, toot our own horn a tiny little bit, and show how we tried to live this culture and leadership piece in the ecosystem. So let's get into it because there's a lot to get into. I've already talked too much because I love all the things we did this year. I'm not going to go deep into the key takeaways, but they were there for you to have a look. They are described in full in the report, and you'll see them appear throughout our presentation today. So I just won't spend a lot of time on that right this moment. We'll just continue on through, I think. Okay, so this is the first year that we have a pan-provincial score, and this is it. Da-da-da. There was no drum roll, but here it is. So this is really the kind of foundational initial data that we'll have collected for the province. Now the question is, do we continue this pan-provincial effort? The answer is we will see. The reason that we came together across the province to run the survey this year in particular was that, so I mentioned last year we had really high engagement in Calgary. Edmonton had incredibly high engagement with over 170 Edmonton respondents. They had nearly 60 respondents from Calgary, and then they had 200 respondents, 200 from other regional innovation networks. So we had always talked about aligning the survey across the province. We thought this might be the time. So we added the question of which regional innovation network are you from in this year's survey? And the results were not what we expected. So this is where we embrace failure and demonstrate that right here at Rainforest. I think we'll just go to the next slide, Amber. Thank you. Bit of a drum roll. I think we're going on to the Calgary score. So here we are for Calgary. This is a much lower sample size than we had last year. The silver lining, I guess, is that 72% of the respondents this year were new to the survey, which kind of leads us to the question of where were all the other folks who filled it out last year. We have some theories around survey fatigue. There were a lot of surveys out at the same time in early January. And some other insights that are coming from other research in the ecosystem might kind of lead to some reasoning behind this, but I won't get into that right this moment. So the 20-point decrease was really spread across all pillars. There was no sharp decrease in Calgary in any particular pillar. So we'll move along to Edmonton's, and we'll share these pillar scores and the total score here with you on Edmonton. They also saw a decrease, and that came mostly from their culture and leadership pillars. But I will mention that this sample size is not necessarily like statistically, is the word effective? You can tell I'm not the data analyst, that's why we hired them. So even when splicing a 37 respondent sample size into the various demographics that we capture, it really doesn't give us a good representation of where those groups are necessarily scoring the ecosystem. So we want to throw that caveat out there. We did highlight the Edmonton scores by pillar in the full report, which will be published, but we will carry on with Calgary results. So we'll start digging in. Oh, sorry, a quick mention, actually. This is not a very visually appealing slide. Sorry, we just pulled it right from the main report. But what's interesting to highlight here is that younger respondents and those who have been in the ecosystem less than 6 months, and this isn't new, we've seen this in previous years, where they seem to have more optimism among the various pillars. So I guess this presents an opportunity to I guess, address or continue to keep that engagement among newer people to the ecosystem alive and healthy and well. The other interesting statistic was around industry demographics. So the real estate industry, policymakers, government representatives, and educators scored high amongst culture and leadership. So emphasizes how they view both the ecosystem and potentially their own internal cultures. So we'll go to the next slide. Just a quick mention of the most common roles identified in the report. So you know where a lot of this is, these voices are coming from, and who to potentially target your own efforts towards, depending on your role in the ecosystem, when using this data to inform your own strategies. So founders, 46%, entrepreneurs, 47%. People could identify as many roles as they identified with. We don't define these terms. It's how people identify themselves. And then ecosystem builders, 53%. I'll make a really quick and interesting comment about that. Almost nearly every like individual like response kind of row that I looked at in the data, almost everybody, regardless of the other roles they identify as, also identify as an ecosystem builder, whether they're a founder, a startup team member, a policymaker. And so I just thought that was really great to highlight as far as folks taking ownership of our culture. So we're going to move into the pillars.
So what are we doing, or what are we talking about when we talk about measuring the pillars? This is what the scorecard assessment is all about. It's these 6 pillars plus diversity, equity, and inclusion. So 6 pillars make up the ecosystem. The right balance is crucial for any ecosystem, and it's measured on a scale out of 1,000. And each pillar is weighted differently. The scorecard assessment provides an honest examination of the ecosystem by describing its weaknesses, its strengths, and its current condition. And so each year we use this to improve the culture of Calgary, Edmonton, and across Alberta. And we develop a series of questions within each pillar, which have been thoughtfully adapted over the years from the historical version of the survey from 2015 and onward. And respondents are asked to answer each question on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 meaning I see this less often, and 10 being I see this all the time in the ecosystem. We also collect the qualitative data for each pillar via comment section, so that's why you're seeing all those wonderful comments. So culture is one of the highest weighted pillars that we measure at Alberta Rainforest, and the score in Alberta is 210 over 300. So culture is the foundation of any innovation ecosystem, and it is the shared values and actions of ecosystem members which determines the success of ecosystem initiatives. So in Calgary, there is a score of 218. This is down 2 points from last year. And some of the key themes we noticed in Calgary was there's a mix of competitive and collaborative cultures for trust and support. There's competition seen at leadership levels, but balanced by a strong helping culture. Maintaining trust and collaboration as the ecosystem grows, including a level of trust among service providers. This indicates a gap in the ecosystem support structure for entrepreneurs, and the necessity for a culture that embraces a supportive ecosystem, actively encouraging entrepreneurs across the spectrum of their journey. This includes risk-taking, failure, and innovation. There's always a desire for continuous improvement and learning and benchmarking from others, which includes adopting frameworks or models to measure cultural health and benchmark against other ecosystems. And there's a strong desire for a culture that celebrates and values recognition of effort and learning from failure, suggesting a shift towards a more supportive culture that recognizes diverse forms of success. So not just recognizing, never mind, this is another pillar. Engagement with a broader ecosystem. So as we saw with the pan-provincial scorecard, there is that desire to connect with people that are not just in Calgary, but across Alberta. And there's a need for fresh perspectives and broader collaboration. And it was also noted in Calgary that there has been more active DEI efforts, such as Calgary Economic Development and the YYC Queer Innovations, our partnership in the Calgary Pride Parade. Sorry, that might
You
have been
can
a little
read
fast.
that later. Some of the quotes are a little long, but we'll power through and you can read the report later. So the leaders pillar, Alberta-wide scored 128 out of 200. Amber, can you click to the next slide? We'll get right into the Calgary score, which went down just 6 points, down to 130 out of 200. And you can see the year over year there. Okay, so a distinct advantage among Calgary's leaders in particular was one of our distinct advantages was that leadership seemed to be more accessible and more visible in the ecosystem. This was through social media and through just attendance of events. This is a pretty big shift from the theme of last year, which is great to hear. Diversity and representation among leaders, this has come up year after year, but this time there's a call, or maybe more of an insight around there being a lot of performative inclusivity happening in the ecosystem. And so there's a call for more diverse, both representation in leaders, but those who embody diversity in their identities and their actions and who are not just champions of it. And so those were new insights. Another really interesting insight around the leadership pillar were around connections to capital resources. So this identification that there is a gap, or call it an opportunity for leaders to be connecting entrepreneurs to capital and to financial literacy in general. This is very specific in comparison to some of the qualitative data we've had from previous years. So a really interesting opportunity there. The other theme around leadership was around collaboration and a unified vision for the province. So folks looking for kind of that big vision for Alberta's ecosystem on a whole, and then some sort of strategy or cohesion among the leaders across the province. And going back to this conversation around trust and building that, the opportunity for leaders to help build that, not just by creating psychological safety, well, by creating inclusivity, but also by creating the psychological safety to actually have the trust to be able to speak about failures, learn from failures, and risk-taking, celebrating it more than seeing it as a negative, and leaders, the opportunity for leaders to champion that. There's a lot on those slides. Getting the full report and the presentation done in under a few weeks is quite the feat. So we apologize if not all the slides are visually. Thanks, Pete.
That's what I think too, right?
They look
Yeah.
amazing. They look amazing.
So policy and infrastructure, the score in Calgary was 89. That's down 5 points from last year. And you can see the year-over-year total. Some of the key themes that we saw, especially in Calgary, government support is not widely noticeable, with more assistance thought to come from local businesses. Entrepreneurs in YYC are frustrated by the ecosystem's complexity. There's advocating for improved collaboration and policies that support diversity and women-led startups. This is seen a lot in Calgary, I think across Alberta as well. This includes long wait times and inefficiencies in decision-making for funding support, and more grants and better promotion for available grants to support diverse entrepreneurs. When it comes to policy and ecosystem leadership, there's critiques of government funding, highlighting slow decision times, ambiguous requirements, oh, thank you, and a perceived preference for private sector investors. There's also concerns about the competitive nature of various ecosystem organizations, leading to duplicated efforts. There's a need for better mentorship opportunities and guidance for new entrepreneurs, and something we've heard year after year and for quite a long time. There's a need for a Pan-Alberta concierge service, or MAP, to help navigate the ecosystem.
You're kidding.
Who's heard of the ecosystem map before? Yeah? No? No? Yeah?
Here there's 26.
I mean, it would be beneficial. I'm not going to lie. Maybe. Anyway, communication, collaboration. There's a need for a centralized source of information or ecosystem. Oh, an ecosystem map to reduce silos and duplication of efforts. Yes, there's just a better need for communication, information sharing, and collaborating within the ecosystem to help reduce silos and to make sure that resources are available across the province for those that may not know about them, and for people who are embedded in the ecosystem that also may not know about them, how to promote them and better collaborate and communicate around them.
All right, so resources across the province on a score of 94 out of 150. And if we go to the next slide, 1 point higher at 95 in Calgary, and that's a 2-point decrease from last year. So a pretty small decrease. There's a lot of repetitive themes here. So themes within the resources pillar are around funding gaps and investment support. And so there were identified gaps in funding, particularly at the scaling stage, though there was also chatter about it at the earlier stages as well. Suggested improvements from the qualitative data were around reintroducing the investor tax credit and expanding self-certified investor education, as well as accelerator programs for investors. So these were some of the recommendations from the respondents. Government procurement and policy came up again around being able to connect smaller tech companies to procurement opportunities with different levels of government. And so there seemed to be a perceived bias of established companies accessing procurement programming and not as many opportunities for the smaller tech companies to use government procurement programs to validate their products and services. The last theme was around resource accessibility and awareness. I'm not going to say the word map again, though it was brought up many, many times. This time more particularly to funding applications. So the redundancy and the, I guess, differences in funding applications, the amount of time and effort that takes for founders in order to access the funding that is there. And there was strong feedback around that there is access to funding, but it's not here in our province. It's not coming from our province. Diversity and inclusion in resources is, the last theme. And that was around really, truly creating inclusive resources and programs, particularly for underrepresented groups such as LGBTQS+, women identified and gender diverse entrepreneurs. So this was less about checking the boxes that you offer these programs and more around really meeting the unique needs of these diverse entrepreneurs.
So role models was 64 for Alberta. We're up 2 points in Calgary at 66, but down 3 points from last year, as you see from the year over year total. That arrow's a little wonky. Oh no, it's down. Sorry, I'm looking at it wonky. Never mind. Too much coffee today again. So there is improvement in diversity among role models, but there is a call for significant room for growth, with note that there are a lot of white males as role models. And so there's a need for inclusive representation across gender, ethnicity, and other diverse demographics. And so implementing structured support for these role models to engage in the ecosystem was something that was seen across all of the pillars. Role models are appreciated for their contributions, but there's a gap in mentorship. Whereas businesses scale, entrepreneurs and individuals become less available to mentor. So there's a need for ongoing engagement and accessibility of role models to the broader ecosystem to help engage future role models. And so that leads into the next theme, which is more support and visibility for new and diverse role models. The importance of showcasing successes and providing platforms for mentorship and networking, and rethinking the criteria of what it means to name someone a high potential future role model, and ensuring that equity is considered. And there's a critical view of how success is measured across the province. But in Calgary, there's an importance of shining a light on those working under the radar and redefining what a role model means beyond financial metrics to include impact and problem solving that was really prevalent, as well as a unified and structured approach to supporting role models when it comes to accessibility resources and mentorship models. So we're going to show you some role models in Alberta. These were named at the end. There was a section to name role models. This picture of folks is not representative of the entire group. There's about 3 pages of role models in the actual report, which you'll see. I know that the report said there isn't a lot of diverse role models. In this page, there's a lot of really diverse role models. I assure you there are a lot of white males in the next 2 pages in the report.
It'll be an awkward few pages.
So there is a need for more diverse role models and folks that aren't highly recognized in the ecosystem. But we just wanted to showcase a few of them today, and some that you may recognize from Calgary and some you may recognize from Edmonton and other places across the province. So thank you to everyone that's a role model, and also everyone here can be a role model, and we just need to create those supports.
I like how Amber put us in the top left corner.
I didn't even do it on purpose.
That slide makes me really happy. Everyone's smiles are so genuine. Okay, the last pillar, we made it. Engaged activities. So provincially, a score of 70. Calgary, as you notice, just has like a slightly higher score than the average here across the board. So we're at 71 with a 2-point decrease from last year. It was nice to see some new themes in this pillar this year. And so the first was around the need for more creative and experiential events. So time to move beyond traditional panel discussions and be more creative, create experiential events that actively engage participants, solve problems, and are action-oriented. People are really looking for direct learning experiences. This aspect of diversity and inclusion comes up again. This is more in a relation to repetitive selection of panelists and really pulling hard on certain role models that may represent diversity, which can be perceived as tokenism, essentially, and starting to look at folks who are under the radar and really giving them the spotlight. Also, folks were looking for event organizers to really address some of the socioeconomic barriers of event participation. This might be things like accessibility or cost of events and others. And then finally, alignment with industry needs. So people stressing that they're not just looking for networking opportunities. They're looking for event organizers to have a clear understanding of current market demands and specific to the problems that both the entrepreneurs are solving for, as well as for what industry is looking for, and really being able to create these strategic and meaningful connections between the startups and their customers. And so, yeah, this was really interesting to see this year. And so that wraps up our synopsis of the Calgary pillars. Again, you can check out the data for Edmonton. It is a small sample size. I'll continue to stress that. The information, it will all be in the report. And you saw elements of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging throughout all of these pillars. So we had conversations on our team whether we integrated into the reporting of the pillars, which we haven't done before the last few years. Diversity, equity, inclusion has been a separate separate section. It is again this year, though it's appearing everywhere. And so we see the integration that culture has beyond the culture pillar. And we have Shannon Pestun join our team this year, which we're incredibly excited about. She's with the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub, Finance Cafe, many others initiatives, and really champions women and Indigenous entrepreneurs. She's been able to provide her insights through our team. And so we're going to turn it over to her for those insights now. Thanks, Shannon.
Thank you. Great job on the report. And I love that I can look out at the room and I see some of those role models that were in that chart. Yourself and Amber, who I think are very well deserved at the top left. Okay, so looking at diversity, equity, and inclusion, this year we expanded our reach a little bit. In past years, we looked at diversity and inclusion, but our definition and the reason we focus on this is changing daily. And the reason I say that it's changing daily is that we understand so much more today than we did years ago about the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion when it comes to an ecosystem and facilitating a strong startup community. So this year we dove in and said, we're going to go into each of the three components, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And it's important that we just start with the definitions to understand why do we even care about how these words show up. So diversity is really about that representation of demographics. And it also, we'll see in a couple of moments, that it's the easiest one for people to identify in organizations. But then what happens is you have a diverse workforce, but is there equity once they're inside those walls? Is there equity within the funding system? Is there equity in the leadership and growth and promotion of the tech careers? And finally, when you don't have diversity and you don't have equity, it's really hard to build that inclusion. But inclusion is also a separate pillar, because we not only want to have a diverse workforce, a diverse tech sector, a diverse ecosystem. Not only do we want it to be equitable, but we want people to show up as their true, authentic selves, bring that life experience, that lived experience. And while we know the stats will show that any company is more economically benefited by having diverse, equitable, and inclusive teams, the sentiment isn't always shared against participants. And I will be totally honest that in this year's survey results, we saw some of those qualitative comments around, you know, just focus it on merit, a job well done, don't worry about this DEI business. But it's an important conversation to have because as we looked across the 6 pillars, this conversation continues to show up in every single pillar, telling us that there's work to do. So Amber, I'll let you click along for me. This quote, I'm gonna actually read it because I think it's really important, because it's one thing to have diversity of people and thinking, but I think it's highly important for members to feel that inclusion. And there is a big disconnect, particularly for women, for any diverse founder. If they're not feeling included, they're not going to participate at the same level in ecosystem engagement activities. They're not going to see equal access to funding. They're not going to see the same growth and trajectory of their companies. So I think it is important to read that quote. So we mentioned that this year we're really focusing on how diversity, equity, and inclusion fit into all buckets of this. And I wanted to point out that across the board, so when we combine diversity, equity, and inclusion, we see that each is actually very important to the general participants. So 8.72 was the average response for those who feel diversity is important. But then we look at equity and that number drops a little bit to 8.4, showing that maybe we don't think equity is as important as diversity as an ecosystem. And then the average response around inclusion was 8.72. So people are telling us that, yes, we believe there's diversity. We're trying to be more inclusive, but there's still a bit of a gap when it comes to equity. So let's take a look at how this rolls out. Last year, this was interesting. We took a look at where the gaps were. We looked at it by percentage point or by points. And last year, we looked at the gap at 0.95. What was interesting this year is that the gaps were actually getting bigger for multiple audiences. So we increased the size of our gap. Otherwise, we would have shown gaps everywhere. But when we take a look at equity, diversity, and inclusion, there were 5 groups that were consistent among the biggest size gaps. And that was women, those who work in government, those who are Indigenous, those who work in the education sector, and those who are participating in the entertainment industry. So what's interesting is that we're not just seeing the gaps in the founders, we're seeing it in the people who are trying to create the programs and create the funding mechanisms. We're seeing it in diverse entrepreneurs, but we're also seeing it by sector. Amber, you mentioned the importance of culture earlier, and it is the most critical element. It is the most critical pillar that carries through all of the other pillars. And an ecosystem's culture, and that includes all of us. It includes the founders, it includes those of us who see ourselves as ecosystem builders, it includes the funders, it includes those who are trying to get more access to financial capital into the hands of entrepreneurs. But we play a really important part in the startup, the success of that startup and the growth trajectory of that startup. So culture shapes every other pillar. If we don't have a trusting culture, if we don't have a collaborative culture, if we don't have a diverse, equitable, and inclusive culture, it's really hard then for leaders in our ecosystem to advocate for things like policy and infrastructure. If we don't take that lens of where these gaps are, it's very hard for us to start saying, well, there's not an accessible or there's not an equitable access to funding, which those comments came out loud and clear in the qualitative section. And leaders play a very important role because we know that what happens in the DEI space is if it's not bought in from leadership, it has a very hard time penetrating throughout the rest of the organization or the rest of the ecosystem. So our leaders play a really important role in helping us move towards a culture of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Role models, as Amber and Brigitte mentioned, there's a very strong call to say we need more people like us. And we know, I'll just pull up the Women Entrepreneurship Knowledge Hub because you mentioned that earlier, Brigitte. But if you can't be it, you can't see it. There is a huge correlation between even encouraging younger people to come into the tech sector. So we have to think about how we present role models, who we're calling leaders in this space, and making sure that they have voices at important tables, whether it's on panel discussions, whether it's on roundtables or economic roundtables. And resources, again, we need to make sure that everybody has access to the funding, to the resources, to the support, to the advice, and to the mentorship that they need. But all our participants generally felt that this was an area that is still under-resourced. The word collaboration came in and trust and working amongst ecosystem partners. Grassroots organizations, many comments came in that there's not enough support for grassroots organizations, and they play a really important role because they understand the complex needs that are happening within members of their groups that they're serving. And around engaged activities, yeah, participants call for the inclusion of fresh voices, and Brigitte mentioned socioeconomic factors are also being highlighted. So where that really showed up in the research was around childcare and elder care, that it's not easy to come get here, the cost of parking, the cost of maybe giving up time working in the business. So there's a whole bunch of other costs that are associated, even though you're trying to participate fully in the ecosystem. So we, Brigitte did mention the sample size. We did take a pan-Albertan look at diversity, equity, and inclusion. That was primarily because of the sample size. But I wanted to be able to put on the slides. We asked people, how important is it for diversity as an important factor to the success of the ecosystem versus the importance to the ecosystem members, and then the importance to the individual. And we can see that across the board, when it comes to, yes, it's important for the overall ecosystem. We showed that earlier, diversity, equity, inclusion, all important. But where the gap really is between the importance of to the individual and how they're perceiving the ecosystem responding to diversity. And so when I take a look at the regional perspectives here, we can see that for Edmonton, which is in this color blue here, the points are actually the highest, so it's most important, but perceived ecosystem is actually lower. And that trend continues across each of them. Let's move over to equity. So a very similar story here. The question was asked about, yes. Great question. We included rural, and I'm not sure what the response rate. Okay, so I just heard that the response rate from rural was 11 participants. And so we're really I think the story lives more in Edmonton and Calgary, although we did take a look at the province-wide, which is what is showing up here in Alberta combined. So thank you. Great question for clarity. But the same story lives here. Again, it's very important. Equity is very important to the individual, but it seems to be perceived less so to the ecosystem, telling us that as an ecosystem, we are not creating those spaces where people feel that there's an equitable opportunity for success. And following the trend, if we take a look at inclusion, it is the same story here. What is interesting, though, is a word that we didn't have last year. So we had diversity and inclusion last year. As I mentioned, this year we put diversity, equity, and inclusion. If I could go back to the equity slide just for one quick second, this was actually where the biggest gaps lived across all cities. So Edmonton had the highest gap. And when I'm talking about gap, I'm looking at importance to the individual versus to the ecosystem for equity. And we saw the biggest gaps here. So while yes, we are moving towards diversity, we see a lot of comments in the survey or in the qualitative report saying that I see more diverse representation, but equity is where the biggest gaps are. So I think also reaffirming that taking a look at diversity, equity, and inclusion as independent and part of a bigger picture was a right thing to do. I was able to cover that one. Thanks, Amber. So I mentioned earlier that there were 5 groups that we saw consistently where there was a gap of 2 points between how something was measured as important to them versus to the ecosystem as a whole. And we'll take a look at where different groups are more greatly impacted by these gaps. So when we take a look at the gap between personal importance of diversity and perceived to the individual against the ecosystem, this is again a gap of greater than 2. Our scale was out of 10. So we see that government, women, education, East Asian, Indigenous, and the entertainment sector is where we saw the greatest gaps. This is all in the full report, so I'm going to just cover this quickly. Now, so if the last one was diversity, this one here takes a look at equity again, and we can see that the gap is actually wider for 14 members of the community. So again, showing the importance that we're not there yet with equity. So you can see the 14 groups lined up there. You can see where they're measuring, how we're measuring that piece. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. And then inclusion, so less than the 14, but we're still not hitting the mark. We're still seeing more gaps when it comes to the inclusion part of how important it is personally against the importance of the ecosystem. And so that's where we have the biggest bulk of work to do. So around equity and inclusion, I would say that most of the comments did say that we're working towards a more diverse tech ecosystem, innovation ecosystem here. Next slide. We do track demographics that are reported to us in the report, and this year we had 16% of all respondents who identified as being neurodiverse. 13% is having a mental illness. We saw an increase in those who identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, or queer. And we saw that 46% identify as a primary caregiver. So that's a really important note because we're seeing more of, as our sector changes, we're seeing that the sandwich generation, right, of having the kids plus elder care. So that's going to continue to become a really important piece as we're watching some of those socioeconomic factors. And 44% of our respondents this year were women. We have about 30 different recommendations that we've outlined inside the report. So I encourage you to spend some time thinking about those. And what we've done is we've taken the measurements against the qualitative commentary, again, along with the quantitative piece, to show where we can start moving the dial within each of the pillars. So last year, while we had recommendations that were overarching to DE&I, this year we've actually taken a more pillar-specific focus on the recommendations to help move us forward. So Brigitte, I'm going to pass it back over to you. And again, so here's the remaining 3 pillars, and I think that covers it for me. So thank you so much for listening, and thank you to those who participated in the survey. You're a very important voice in us being able to move forward as an ecosystem. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Thank you for your support this year. So this is a powerhouse team of, just happens to be women, who have supported this project for the last 3 years. We just saw Janelle Morgan. She's a PhD candidate at UFC and a psychometrics expert. She supported us with the survey itself and the cleaning up the data and providing us with all different splices and things of that data. And then we also have special mention to Rose Wong of Cashew. So Cashew Research is a local startup. They're currently in CDL. I have a lot of exciting things happening at Cashew, actually. I don't know if I can share them all, but watch for them. They're an incredible up and coming startup in Calgary. So a huge thank you to the team. Thank you again, Shannon. Thank you. Thank you, Amber, while you're standing here in front of me. The last few weeks are always really fast and furious as far as pulling all of this together. And thank you to the team on the steering committee at Rainforest Edmonton. We have Lan Tan here today from that group. Joel, why is Joel's last name? Joel, James Kierstead is no longer with the group, but was for most of the year. And others, Gail Powley, I'm sorry, because I'm going to miss some and that's just not fair, but we do have some Edmontonians on the Zoom call. Gail, if you can give them all a shout out in there, that'd be great. So thank you all for filling out the survey. We will take some Q&A. Hopefully we can answer your questions. We do have the data in front of us. The other point here is that this is available to you. So if you're interested in the data, you can contact us and we can provide you with some of it or all of it, depending on what you need. And the full report will be published soon. So as Amber mentioned earlier, there are only 2 more lunch without lunches. So this will be, we are coming close. We're trying to kind of leak the news slowly, but we are coming to an end of this meetup, which is why next week we're going to be focusing on other resources and meetup groups in the city. So please join us for that. And is there anything else to add?
I don't think so.
No? Okay, well, are there any questions that folks have for Shannon or ourselves? And if not, we'll move into networking online and otherwise. Yeah, Patrick. website. It's a really big document, so sending it by email would be challenging, but it will live on the scorecard page on the website. Also, the breakdown of demographics is all in the appendix, so that might give you enough data without getting the raw data from us if you need it.
I'm also gonna put a post on social media too, just saying that it's live, and then so just look for like the link in bio, the link on LinkedIn, all that good stuff, and it'll lead you right to the report once it's published.
As far as like what happens next. Yeah, great point. So we share it publicly. As I mentioned at the top of the presentation, the onus really does fall on organizations within the ecosystem to use this data, but also all of the other reports that are coming out of the ecosystem right now. We'll give the mic quickly to Jen Jensen of the Calgary Innovation Coalition, who are also conducting research. And so yeah, onus is on individuals and organizations to use the data for their own planning purposes and help inform the initiatives that they're creating in the ecosystem. So we have taken some of that work on at Rainforest, but it's an ecosystem wide kind of job. Is there anything to add to that? Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to add when we think about ecosystems, so there's a role of the individual, so people like you and I, but then we can take a look at what is the role of the organizations and how are organizations moving that through. That includes things like post-secondary environments and post-secondary institutions who are also a huge part of our pipeline. So it's not just the funders, but then we can go into more of a societal look about even the role of media and how media needs to be covering more diverse voices in the tech sector, covering more stories. So it's kind of an individual, organizational, and then societal level. So this this really belongs to everyone.
How do you get more young people involved in the ecosystem? Does anybody want to take it?
I think maybe like there's also like so much out there in the ecosystem. So I think it's just kind of, and like maybe, I don't know if it's like an individual approach, but like I know like at Rainforest, we, at lunch without lunch and like during stuff like this, you talk to someone and maybe a young student or a young person, and it's like, what are you interested in tech, or like check out this program or check out this program. And I think also focusing on like going back to that role model pillar and focusing on younger role models so that they can actually see themselves in this role and being like, tech is for everyone, innovations for everyone. It's not just for people that have been in it for how many years, and making sure that it's actually accessible for students to be a part of it. So I think like at a grassroots level, it's a really good place to start there. I don't know if that really answers your question, but that's, yeah. Yeah.
You need a mic. The Zoomers can't hear what we're talking about.
Good question. And the answer might be to help young people understand the value of leaning in and helping, and that's good for their growth and advancement. So if they get past the ask, I'm looking for this, and lean in and help other people, that can advance their own careers and their own perspective on life.
I think it also goes back to like the accessibility of role models too, right? Like having those role models as well to be available to younger students.
Yeah, to that note, Amber has been in high schools this year. We've both been in post-secondaries. We've got to show up in the places they are. We can't expect to meet them where they aren't. We have to meet them where they are.
And I would say this is where culture becomes the most important pillar again, because if we are not focused as an ecosystem on diversity, equity, and inclusion, it's very hard to engage young people to come into this field. So again, culture influences, where does government put funding around getting more young people into tech? How does a newcomer strategy into Calgary fit into making sure that more newcomers and immigrants are able to participate in the tech ecosystem? We're seeing programs like Young Women Who Code, so little hackathons and specialized groups. And that goes back to that equitable resources. And so when we understand where our gaps are and when we understand that we don't have diverse representation, thinking about strategies from a government level, an education level, a funding level, that is going to work collectively to solve for that.
Sure.
There's probably more answers to this question and many questions in the audience if we were to sit, and workshop this as small groups. So something to consider. Any other questions? Yes, Sarah.
Thanks, Amber. I know that you had mentioned, Brigitte, at the beginning, obviously a lower engagement rate with the survey. And you had said, maybe some sort of survey burnout come January. Any other thoughts on why there was less engagement this time around than in previous years? And are there ways that we can, as a community, better support increased engagement with the report and with the scorecard going forward?
Thank you for that question, Sarah. Timing might be a factor for sure. Things are changing every year. We did see more surveys than ever in January. Our thoughts are potentially this is pushed out during Innovation Week next week or Startup Week in Edmonton, and then we still capture most of the year and get, can really get in front of a lot of people at one point. So that's one thought that's been thrown around as far as what we can do differently. As far as engagement and support from individuals, as much as like social media campaigns and all the rest, email campaigns can have some effect. What we found most useful was individual email or in-person DM asks to folks to both fill it out and share it on their team. We had a lot of people respond with, I filled one out for our team. And this is an individualized survey. And so we, even as a social contract signature, we ask that you sign up as an individual because we know there's movement and there should be movement throughout the ecosystem. And so, yeah, just in your small actions, I suppose. Jen is going to take a few minutes here from the CIC to speak to some research that they're conducting. And there were some themes, I think, that might have emerged there. I don't know if you can speak to them or not. Jen, I know that she doesn't have all her data in, but a bit of a sense of like we're growing. And as we grow, how do we maintain that connectivity and collaboration that Calgary really has been known for? We see a lot of maybe the gaps or challenges in this report, but there are many opportunities and there's much positivity and optimism. The fact that EDI and these things are coming up in every pillar is pretty cool and interesting. We're having the conversations, we're willing to learn. And so I think that is a positive, but we're growing very quickly. And so how do we keep all of these conversations vibrant? So Jen, we can have time to network after, but I'm going to turn it over to Jen just for a quick few minutes so she can speak to the research the CIC are doing. So thank you again, everybody, and we can chat after.
Thanks, Brigitte. I'm just going to sit here really quick, just so I didn't really prep a lot, but I just wanted to share some of our data. And I did hear that Alberta Innovates is sponsoring grade 10 students to go to Inventures for free. So that could be a fun way to engage students. So any questions, let me know. I can definitely hook you up with that. But the CIC just completed some focus groups. And so really, it's okay. The data is the same. I'm not going to just stand up here and reiterate. We heard exactly the same thing that Brigitte and Amber and Shannon spoke to. And so I think the key is what now? What as a community are we going to do together collectively? We have ideas. Let's all pull things together for our own part. I am going to be responsible for ecosystem mapping. Where's the glue? The rainforest is the glue. I'm going to do it, but
You know, one of the key things, I'd just like to reiterate this, is that we hear that the rainforest acts as the glue of the ecosystem. And so how can we embody that together is something that I want to leave this group with, because the idea of culture is something I'm going to take away through the rest of our process. But, you know, how can we amplify this glue is something that, you know, I'm just going to say and pass back.
I want to add on to what you said, because you said something really important, and it's not just survey fatigue. I'm going to go out on a limb here, Brigitte, don't panic, but it's also, if we're not going to actually do things about it, people get tired of saying the same thing all the time, and then there's actually nothing that meets the recommendations. And so part of the recommendations is to do just that. If we're going to, we have to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. And that comment did come out, like, I'm tired of doing this survey because nothing changes. So we have to be really mindful of that. Thank you. Thank you, Edmonton.